Hello, everybody. DJ Batman here and Jonas, and we are talking about our older movies better than modern movies. So let's go ahead and get right into the topic. So, what do you think?
Well, it depends, right? Like the common lawyer answer, right? Does it? What do you mean? What do you mean by better in
Um,
this context? Like, what are we judging these movies off of? And are we talking about? I didn't actually watch any specific movies. I wanted to watch some movies, but I didn't. I didn't get around to it. But I did write a couple of things down to talk about. So.
okay. Well, I'd be more like, like quality, the writing, are they being made to just make money, or are they being made to actually tell some kind of story or message instead of just trying to capitalize on, making a bunch of money and stuff, you
Well,
know.
yeah, but so my thing that I thought about this for a little while, and I had a couple of two or three things that I wanted to talk about, when it comes to like the money aspect of movies and stuff, and whether or not they're just really just cash grabs. But what I feel like more is that it's kind of like a talk about remakes of movies more than like just movies in general, like or sequels to movies rather than original movies. Um, but what I was gonna say initially was when you talk about better, like the story being better and the story being written better or explored better, how old are we talking? Because I feel like a lot of the old movies, like from the 1920s and stuff, were like not really. They didn't really have a story. A lot of it was like um, just people doing things in front of a camera, more or less.
Yeah. Well, I'm meaning like when movies became more of about making production, because the first actual um, productive movie, I think it was Metropolis. I'm probably getting the name wrong. Med, I think it was Metropolis.
I guess I should ask, before we even like fully establish anything. What is your like yes or no answer to
Yeah, it was
that?
Metropolis. Yeah, it was the
Of
first.
of whether or not older movies are
Well,
better
I
than
would go ahead
modern
and
movies.
get into, like, let's say the Doolittle movie, not
Now,
Doctor
well,
Doolittle.
wait. Just yes or no.
Okay.
And I'll answer that too because I didn't even do that either. So,
Go ahead
yes
and
or
repeat the
no.
question again.
So, are modern movies, or are older movies better than modern movies? In your
Yes,
opinion?
in my opinion.
In my opinion, I would say no.
Okay.
So those are the establishing opinions, I guess. We can get that out of the way. So go ahead.
Well, for me, I'll go ahead and use the movie Doolittle, for example, not the Doctor Doolittle, which completely different franchise. Same kind of concept, but different thing. But for instance, the original Doolittle movie compared to the new one with Robert Downey Jr., I think the original one had much more appeal to it because it it basically made the character in the original one understand the animals based on how they actually speak. Like he actually spoke and did the same kind of things with the animals, unlike the new one, which they made the animals basically just speak English and moving mouths and all that stuff, which I thought was just not as good, because it seemed with the original one like like they were utilizing things better back then with that one because he had to communicate with them in their language, instead of just doing it the easy way and um, just having them speak English so that the audience can understand. Because I kind of like the aspect of, like the animal saying something and him having to, tell the person what the animal said. I like that a lot better more than just blatantly understanding what that
But this
animal's saying.
is but this is one example, right? Like that's a singular example of a movie that the original or the older version of the movie is better than a current modern movie. But that's like a generalization, like just based off of your experience then of like, hey, well, this one movie. But like in general concepts, like what things did they have access to, or what things would be presented better? Like what pressures would be that would older movie makers have that would pressure them to make movies that were better than current movies?
Well, I would say more if it came down to, they had actual talented actors that, they mostly got from like Broadway and all that stuff, that had a good background. But at the same time, they wanted to produce something that was fun, entertaining, and not just about, how much money they're going to make, but just giving something to people to enjoy compared to modern movies, which it seems like it's mostly all about how much money they're going to pull. I mean, you see all these things all the time being like, well, this movie made more than this movie, so that makes it good. It's like, just because it made a lot of money doesn't mean it's good. I mean, there's a lot of old time movies that are like cult classics that people will watch over and over again and can quote so many lines, from older stuff compared to newer stuff, which most people watch once and they kind of forget about it the moment they leave, for the most part.
So, yeah, that's due to how many more movies are being made, I feel like, because older movies there was not as many of them because they were a lot more niche and hard to make
Yeah, and I think that's kind of
versus current movies.
yeah, and I think that kind of makes them a lot better is the fact that they were, not making as much. I think the oversaturation of how many movies come out every year, I think, is a little bit too much. You know, so
Well, from my perspective, I kind of um
because like for instance, take the Jurassic Park movie. That movie was in theaters for like 3 years before it left, and eventually made its way onto VHS. Which I know by saying that makes me sound really old because I know a lot of people are going to be listening to this that are new. The newer generation will be like, "What's a VHS?"
what's
But
what I want to bring up though is how much of that is the bias that we have from growing up. Like, because you could say that older movies are better because, like, memories that you had, you know how you always have a bunch of memories from when you're a kid, or like time seems to run really slow when you're a kid and speed up as you get older. And a lot of that is because of the new experiences that we have and the new connections that we make with things. Like the first time we see a pattern and we recognize that pattern is far more memorable, and then we apply that as a lens to see the world through, right? Like if you saw a movie and say it was Jurassic Park, and they used some literary device or some like visual pan or whatever they did in the movie, and then you saw it again in another movie, it wouldn't be as impactful. And instead of seeing it as like what the actual camera pan is in the movie for the say the new movie that you watch, you would always reference back and say, "Oh, they just did the same thing as Jurassic Park." You know what I mean?
yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying. But the thing is, though, is I mean, yeah, there were some movies that came out when I was a kid that I enjoyed, but even as an adult, I've been going back and watching older movies, and I find them much more enjoyable because it seemed like the quality was there more than just the quantity. Like they were actually taking the time to try to put together a good story, something that can last a long time, even if the time frame that it takes place in is no longer relevant with today's world. It still works in its own way.
But that's not lost. I don't feel like that's lost in modern movies. It's just that, like, to say that I guess you could say that because of all of the fluff, like, um, more movies are being made now. Like, I mean, you could search it up, like, if you really wanted to right now. You could see how many movies were made, in a time period that you want to say are old movies or considered old movies versus a modern day, like how many feature length films are produced or whatever, to see. But I don't think that that's necessarily, um, it doesn't mean that the movies today are any worse necessarily, like by necessity, because of how many more there are that exist. Like, yeah, you're gonna have a lot more that are like more mediocre or more mundane, as like filler, right? But there's still really good movies being produced, right? Like, I would say on average, maybe you could say that older movies were better just because there was fewer of them. But I don't think that that makes, like, overall, like, if you take the best movies of the decade and you compare them, I don't think that you would see a loss in quality.
Well, the thing is, though, is I believe in modern times that a lot of the movies that are considered high quality aren't really high quality, because there's movies that aren't getting as much recognition that actually in today's world that actually are just as good as older movies, but they just don't get the recognition because they're not the happy-go-lucky just stuff going off every 2 minutes. Because because if you look at people in the past compared to people nowadays, our attention spans themselves have actually decreased by a lot. So for modern movies to keep people entertained, you got to constantly have something going on almost all the time. That's the reason why Marvel movies have been doing so well, is
But
because
how is that bad though? Like, how does that make older movies objectively better than modern movies if they're tailoring to then be more like visually appealing to the modern day people? Like, I don't see how that follows that they're better, because like that would be that you think like they're better, like, personally, like you could like older movies like that, but I don't see how that applies generally.
well, you can see the correlation pretty heavily for the attention span of modern audiences is actually getting smaller and smaller.
Yeah, but I don't see how that matters though. Like, if the movie is good, in the time that it existed, like if you have an old movie, right, and then that movie is made for people with longer attention spans, and they're willing to sit there and watch it, and then modern day, like, they're made for people with shorter spans, and then they watch that and they like that just as much. I don't see why that would be, the old one would be better than the new one just because it's made for people with shorter attention spans.
Yeah, but by constantly catering to that, it's actually making that worse. And there's been research to actually show that because of how we produce things, especially movies and stuff, it actually is making people's attention spans getting smaller and smaller, to the point. It's like I see all the time, especially on YouTube, somebody makes a half-hour long video, which is entertaining and fun, and I enjoy the whole thing, but you got people in the comments just being like, oh, this is too long, can you make it like 5 minutes, 10 minutes long? I had friends that I wanted to show them some really cool documentaries that were in depth and had a lot to them, and they were like, is there any way we can get a shorter version of this for like 5 or 10 minutes? It's like, how are you going to compact 2 hours of like detailed information into 10 minutes? It's because it seems like people don't really want to take the time to really enjoy it the way it was made because they want it shortened down, or there's not enough going on to keep their attention, you know, which I think is a
Hmm.
big problem because I mean, like I said, there's been lots of research over the decades that have shown because of how we produce things and promote things, it actually impacts society a lot, especially when it comes to our attention span. Like, like let's say for instance something big was going on in the world, and it took them a couple hours to really break it down. Well, people are gonna be like, is there like a shorter version, that's just like a couple paragraphs? But you can't explain all that in a couple paragraphs when there's a lot more nuance and detail to what's actually going on. Same thing with like science and stuff as well. Not a lot of people will understand how things work because they want it shortened down into a shorter thing.
I mean, I see how that like kind of follows from like a uh general modern movies are bad for your attention span or for like people people shouldn't spend all their time watching things that are um you know catering to that, but I don't see how that necessarily like applies to older movies being better because they're not that way.
Well,
Like if you just compare the movies to each other, right? Like um in the times that they're made, like a person isn't going to necessarily take into account, oh, this is hurting my attention span. I really need to, you know, start watching things that are longer or like, like they're not gonna just like take that into account when they're watching the movie. They're just gonna be like, ah, I like this movie for, it was fun or whatever. And then they're gonna watch an older movie and they're gonna be like, ah, that was good too, but in a different way. You know what I mean? Like, I don't see necessarily how that like applies to each other, like how that compares the two.
I mean, I've met a lot of people that can't stand older movies because they think that they're boring. There's not a lot going on. It drags on too long because like I said, with modern movies, especially Marvel, which people have watched too much of, because I will say Marvel in the beginning was good because it stuck to more of like a real concept, and then just being flashy and having stuff constantly going on all the time and able to take breaks, because with good story writing, it's all about having action and then taking time away from that action. It's like what Miyazaki said, who's written so many amazing animes. He's always said when it comes to movies, when you have an action scene, when you have something big going on, you need to have a moment of relaxation and a moment of calm so that you can take in what you just saw. Because if you constantly have action going on all the time with very little time for a break, you can't really take in everything you just saw. It's just constant action, constant stuff going on, and you're going to end up forgetting what happened previously because now you're more focused on what's going on currently. And that's the problem I believe with modern movies, is that there's too much action going on in a long period of time, and not having enough breaks within those time periods to actually um, take in what you just saw. That's why I said like earlier Marvel movies, they were great because there was fewer of them, but it made them take time for when there was action that you could have a bit of break, figure out what's going on, and understand what you just saw, compared to newer stuff, which is just stuff going on, stuff going on, stuff going on, stuff going on, and the breaks are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Which is another big problem.
So you would just want them to throw in some more like minutes of like pad time to like try to like make the movie longer, basically. Like the movies are fine the way that they are, but they need more extra scenes that don't matter to the story, or like they need more story development in between the action scenes. Like what
No,
would your solution be?
like if they wrote them better, they would still be able to have them the same amount of time they do, but actually put stuff that is relevant to the story. But that's more of like for instance, like we'll take Endgame for example, right? They spent all this time doing all this big stuff, you know, going back, getting all uh the now I'm forgetting what they're called.
The Infinity
There
Stones?
we go, the Infinity Stones, right? And then they snap and bring everybody back, and we go from that directly, which was, you know, a bunch of action stuff going on, directly to a battle scene. It's like there was no time to sit there and relax and see what the aftermath of bringing everybody back. You know, we didn't get like, you know, people have a time to be like, oh my goodness, this person's back, you know, welcome back, you know, da 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 da. It went straight from they went back, got the Infinity Stones, and then immediately snapped everybody back, and then immediately went into a battle. There was
But
real
is popular mean like you're saying that modern movies are can be or are just as good but not as popular as you would want them to be. Like that seems to be the grudge here because like you're talking about like popular movies in the modern day not being um like of as much substance or character as you would be used to, and the movies that are like that are now not as popular when they were more commonplace. Like that's really the grudge is the like
well,
the catering to like how humans' brains function, or like how the new generation perceives media rather than how you used to.
well, no, I mean I understand that. It's just the thing is though is that we are influenced all the time by how, you know, things are done and how things are perceived and how we, and especially movies. 'Cause, I mean, there are a lot of people that think that certain things that happen in movies are real, you know, because people say, oh well, I saw it in a movie so it has to be real, you know, but that's not true, you know. And then that's a problem that we forget is that we are influenced by the things we watch, by the things that we are around, especially in society, that can influence us and how we are as people. So if they're making movies that aren't, you know, like, you know, that've got good, you know, content, or is willing to, you know, make you sit for a moment and reflect and understand, you know, the kind of things you just saw, or have, you know, any real emotion because, you know, people are scared of feeling anything other than happiness, you know,
Oh, there you go. That's something we could talk about. Because I think I agree with that.
yeah.
That the stories of movies are getting. I don't know because I haven't seen very many old movies, but I would say that in general people are kind of afraid of feeling anything
Yeah.
other than happiness. Like
And
if a movie doesn't end the way that they, you know, happily ever after, then they they don't enjoy the movie, or they don't like think that it's a good movie.
yeah, like I'll take for example, which you probably haven't seen, and I won't spoil anything, but there was the movie that M. Night Shyamalan recently did, which was based on a book called The Cabin at the End of the World. And the thing that bugged me the most was the fact that he changed the original ending from the book because it ended on a more depressing, sour note, and also with how it happens, he didn't want to do it that way because he thought it would be perceived as like racist or some kind of thing like that, which I go, well, you know, people, yeah, they when they read the book, they were like, oh my goodness, that was like heart wrenching. That was really hard to read. But it's like, to me, it's like that's the point. It's like making everything happy is not a good thing. I mean, yes, you can have happy endings, in some movies. That's fine. But I believe movies that have got those, emotions, like the movie The Whale that Brendan Fraser originally did. Like, I believe it should have made way more money than it did because it was really hard hitting, had a great story and a great meaning behind it. But a lot of people were lost because they're more watching, the more happier stuff like Marvel, which is just always happy. Which,
I wouldn't say that it's always happy, but it's more happy and it always ends happily
yeah,
because I feel like that's a problem with a lot of modern day horror movies or like scary movies is that like they make characters that are unlikable on purpose so that we don't care if they die as characters that die, and then the characters that are the main characters always live. Like they're directors are more afraid to have characters in the story that actually you can connect with because then you feel terrible when they end up dying or by having a choice that they can't get out of to sacrifice something. So I feel like that takes away from movies, but I also feel like that's something that would probably have been more accentuated in older movies as people were a lot more um, in tune with the feelings of the characters. The stories were longer, and it wasn't like we didn't have video games where people were just like mowing down like rows and rows of people. Like there wasn't that much violence in older movies, and when there was, like, it wasn't like um it wasn't presented in a way where the characters actually really were super invested into something. Yeah, there's movies that have uh like sad scenes in them, but I feel like it's the same amount as today movies.
yeah. Well, I mean, I've seen, I watch a lot of movies because I love movies, but it's much harder for me to enjoy the more modern ones just because they lost a lot of that aspect. They you can't get invested like with like you were saying with horror movies. I can't get invested in the characters, because almost every one of them, like, these guys are douchebags. Like, why do I care?
I
like,
think that I think one of the things that takes away from modern movies though is the grandeur of things, like trying to make things like Endgame, where
yeah,
there's so it's so big and there's so many people and they're all fighting in this massive war, right? Like you can't really say that you care about any of these characters because there's so many. There's an entire army, right?
yeah,
Like it's ridiculous to think that like, oh, I'm going to care about this as much as I'm going to care about, an individual like family. Like something like smaller where you just have a family feud or something, or like a small group versus a small group of people where you can connect with the characters a lot more individually instead of just like, well, what you were talking about, having action for action's sake, like having just a bunch of flashy scenes that look cool and are more of like a tech demo of what's capable in CGI rather than something that actually it builds any sort of story um, aside from that it happened.
Yeah. Well, it's just
Because,
like if
like if
you.
you had a book, you wouldn't an entire war can't even be displayed in a book. Like how would you write a book and have an entire like war aside from just saying that oh it happened or following a one or two characters through or like maybe a small band of characters through an army, like a little bit of an army, right? You can't just show an entire army like hundreds of thousands of people like all lined up or whatever they end up having in movies, or it's just like it's a ridiculous amount of stuff going on, and it's like you can't really care about any of it.
Well, I mean, in books you can write, large armies. I mean, the Lord of the Rings, for instance, it really, because the writer knew what he was doing, was able to invest you into the characters, but also, was able to
But
get you
you're
to.
not. But you're following the individual characters. You're not following like this global battle
Oh yeah, yeah.
where you go from like, you know, one group of people fighting to the next group of people fighting to the next group in like in how it is in Endgame where it's just like a pan across an entire like scene of all of these people fighting and you're not invested in any individual battle or any individual within that battle, but you're
Oh
just
yeah.
watching all of the scenes of all of these people fighting, and it's supposed to be entertaining just on the sake of like wow look at all these colors moving around on my screen.
Yeah, and especially with Endgame, it was just going from like it'd be seeing these people fight, and then all of a sudden, boom! Now you're watching these people fight, and then boom, you're watching these. It's like, wait,
Exactly.
I want to focus on this person. Like I don't care about the other ones. But the problem is, and that's one thing I did want to bring up is the fact that with modern movies is that they try to appeal to too many people. It's like I'm all about making movies more accessible for other people, but I believe when you try to appeal to as many people as you can, that also becomes a problem. Because for me, it's always about the core audience, the core people, the ones that will always come back to it. Because
Yeah,
because
it does limit the audience, but I feel like that's how it is in every bit of media nowadays, like not just exclusive to
well,
movies.
yeah, yeah.
It's something that happens to everything.
Yeah, and then they always try to reach too many people, and it's like, depending on what it is, yeah, you might want to reach more people, but I believe when it comes to entertainment, you should be trying to find those core people, those people that are gonna, you know, pump money into it, not just during the movie, but after the movie, because like a lot of franchises, have seen a huge decline in their core audience because those people are just like, you left us in the dust, so we're gonna go find something else now to put our money in and invest it in. Which I think is a big problem, especially like with Star Wars. The original Star Wars was great, it still is. The prequels, they're not horrible. They're actually still fun. But then you got the modern stuff, and it just seems like they just forgot about the people that were there in the beginning that helped make this franchise what it was. And I think that's another big problem, is that franchises, especially nowadays, they're not giving the original fans or the original people that made it as popular as it is, what they need. That's why I like the new Ghostbusters movie. Like, it wasn't perfect. There was a lot of flaws in it, but in the end, they were giving the fans, the people that grew up with the franchise, what they wanted, but at the same time trying to appeal to the newer generation, which was a good way of the way that they branched the two together, which was good. They weren't, alienating the people that have been with them since the beginning, but also trying to get the new generation on board, but without going the length of, like, which I believe kills any franchise, is when they go, we're making this to appeal to modern audiences. And it's if that's your main purpose, it's going to die, because you need the original people, the people that grew up with it, to be the ones to introduce, the newer generation into these. Because I see parents all the time, having their kids watch like the original Ghostbusters or Star Wars or any of that stuff, and gets them involved more, because it's something they can connect with, that both the newer and older generation connect with. So if they make something new that tries to appeal to both audiences and keeps them both, together, I think that will be much better, especially going forward. But it just seems like most stuff nowadays just trying to appeal to the newer generation and just kind of alienating the original,
So
you
here's
know.
a question then. Should remakes of movies exist at all?
Depends on the remake. Like if the movie that originally came out was really bad, and then they make a new one which is actually better, I'm okay with. But I
But
think a
but
movie that
but
was
why would they remake a movie that's bad in the first place though? Like if
well,
a movie is bad, then they have no reason to remake it because it wasn't successful, so then it wouldn't gain any traction when they remade it, right?
no, I mean there's been plenty, not as many, but there's been plenty of older movies, that were terrible because they were written bad. They didn't stick to the source material as well as they should have.
But then,
And
then it's based off of of a book or something. Then right?
yeah,
Then it's just an adaptation of like a another work. But like if you have an original film like that's just in trying to be like a film, a lot of people would not want to just take that on unless it's like entirely forgotten about that it even existed, and then you just rebrand it as like not a remake but it's like a remake still.
yeah. Well, I mean,
But then, is that a remake though? Like if you're just making a movie that's the same, like if you're basing it off of like Harry Potter or something, and you make a new movie about Harry Potter,
which they're
like
doing.
is it really a remake then of a previous movie? It's not,
Well,
right?
I mean,
It's a remake of. But if you have The
oh
Lion
god.
King only existed as a movie, right? It didn't have any other work, and so
Yeah.
remaking The Lion King.
Well, actually, The Lion King was actually taken from another movie that came out before called the Story of Kimba, I think it was.
Mm-mm. That's not
But
true.
but but
The
the
Kimbo was multiple different shows, and it like multiple TV shows and multiple movies that were like over 50 episodes each. So like the fact that Lion King actually acts like and has things in it that are similar to Kimba, you're comparing a 90-minute film to like 3,000 minutes of Kimba footage. And like
hmm,
if how many things can you do with a lion in the African savannah,
well, I mean, yeah.
in that much of time? Like the it's not really the same thing. They didn't copy Kimba.
Yeah.
Kimba existed separately from the Lion King, and it doesn't mean that Disney wasn't inspired by Kimba,
Well, no, I'm not saying they
but
weren't inspired, but
they
just
didn't rip Kimba off. Like Kimba was is totally different
yeah.
than
Of course, I mean, The Lion King itself was an adaptation of one of Shakespeare's plays, so
yeah,
they just changed it a little
Hamlet.
bit. But let's use Lion King for example. The newer one was just straight up terrible, mainly because they left a bunch of scenes from the original one out because they didn't think it would be appropriate for modern audiences, which I think is
Right.
another problem.
The whole "Be Prepared" song was removed.
Oh yeah, and I thought that
Um,
was like one of the best things because you really understood how evil this guy really was, and you're like, oh man, I hate him, but the song is pretty awesome though. But I still hate him.
yeah,
you
the
know?
reason that they removed that because it was during the scene there was a lot of like Nazi
Yeah,
symbolism
but I think that was the whole
stuff.
point.
It was the whole point, and it was appropriate then. But Disney wants to be, perfect. Like, have you actually watched like Disney do like their like Christmas musicals or like whatever they do for the holidays and stuff? Like Dude, everybody there is like plastic, I swear.
Yeah.
Like they all have smile plastered on their face, and like they all look super perfect and like mega makeup. Like even the people like watching are like supposed to be like, a part of the audience. Like the whole front row of like group of people are all like super attractive, like very young, like 20s, like
Yeah,
groups
and
of people. It's not
I
like
will.
there's no one's normal there. Like that's not what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, and that's another thing I believe that's wrong with modern movies is like anytime they put people in movies, it's like why are they always super attractive? Like what happened to normal looking people? Like you watch older movies, you're like, wow, some of these people actually kind of look like me. They look imperfect, they got imperfections. They're not their jaw isn't chiseled and they don't got like they're not sculpted perfectly, and it's like
Right.
nowadays it's like everything it's like why is everyone so super attractive? It's like why can't anybody look normal anymore? It's just like what happened to normal looking human beings? It's like people don't always look like this. That's like a small percentage of people.
Yeah, it's a bit
Or
of a tangent. Yeah, we got
yeah.
off on a tangent.
Yeah, I know, but
So
it's just
remakes. So should remakes of movies exist?
um well, I mean to be honest, I'd rather see more original content, but it gets harder in today's world, especially with how many movies come out. It's kind of hard to make something absolutely original because you're going to end up copying somebody in some way. But, you know, I think remakes should only happen if the original one was so bad that it just isn't worth watching and somebody can actually do the story right this time and make it good. Other than that, I just think that most of them are
It,
just cash grabs
yeah.
just to get people in on the name.
Right, right, right. Yeah. See, that's what I think too, but it's also kind of weird because if you change a story so much that it makes it from a crappy story to like a really good story, like is it really the same story? Like it might be featuring the same characters, but it's not the same story anymore.
Well, I mean,
So
yeah.
I think that any shot for shot remake
Oh,
like
yeah,
The
shot for shot
Lion
is
King
ridiculous.
is should never be done. I don't think that they need to make like a Star Wars remake in the future, of the original Star Wars.
Yeah.
Um like yeah, you could, and yeah, there's like wow, you could make a few things more digitally improved or like realistic or whatever. Like there's scenes where they had cardboard people up and you can kind of see them at the right angle and wow, oh man, it's a quote quote mistake or whatever. But like instead of that, it's just going to be a bunch of CGI things anyways, and I
Yeah.
don't think that's necessarily better. I feel like that's kind of like if they did something like that, it would kind of just be it wouldn't be better. It would just be trying to get more money out of the same thing,
Yeah.
I mean, they would get more views probably than they did on the new Star Wars stuff Disney made if they just remade the original one. But
Yeah.
they would also probably get a lot of hate for that. So maybe they'll wait 30 years and then make another Star Wars.
I don't think they probably wait that long. I mean, they're already talking about remaking Harry Potter, so I mean,
Yeah, right.
which I think is a big mistake because the original ones were so good in themselves. I mean, yeah, they weren't perfect, but they were fun, they were entertaining. I mean, I remember seeing them in theaters and they were enjoyable. But it's
Mhm.
just seeing a remake. I think it's just not needed. It's like we already had the story told. We don't need to be told again. But yeah, like you were saying with CGI, that's why I was really upset when Netflix canceled the Dark Crystal: Age of Resistance. Because like the Jim Henson Company, they originally came to Netflix and said, "Hey, we'll do it, but we want to do it in animation form." Because it would cost a lot of money to do everything, by hand. Because that's what they're going to do. They're going to try to do as much as they can with real props and use as little CGI as possible. But Netflix was like, no, we want it to look like the original movie. And they're like, okay, well, we can do that, but just letting you know now it's going to be expensive. But And that's I think is another problem with modern movies is they go too heavily on CGI. And I know that they say, well, it costs a lot of money to make a lot of these props. It costs a lot of money to do this. And I go, yes, but at the same
You're
time,
making a lot of money. Like,
yeah, but not at the same time. But the thing is, though, I've said is like, well, if these things cost so much to make, you know that there are people out there that would be willing to buy these things off of you, right? So you can probably make some of your money back. I mean, how many people like if they made like most of the Marvel movies like more practical and less CGI because they're like mostly CGI.
Mhm.
There are billions of people out there, I'll just say hundreds of millions. Billions might be too much, but hundreds of millions of people that be willing to spend a high price to get an item from that movie. But the problem is most of the stuff you see is it's fake. So it's like you like what's the
Right.
point. But they make excuses all the time, just being like, well, it costs less to do CGI. I'm like, yes, but it's lazy.
You can have Captain America's honest to goodness real morph suit with sticky tape on it. You can have that.
There are people
You
that would
can
buy
buy
it.
his true green screen suit that he used for the movie.
But people would buy it.
Yeah, it's just a funny thing to think
Yeah.
about, right? Like there's the little dots with the markers for the CGI stuff, and you're just like buying like what was like buy a real Infinity Stone, and it's just like a like green block that has like dots all over it. Like it's literally like this like the size of like a potato.
Yeah.
It's not even like a real like anything. It's just a freaking green screen. You're like prop. It's like, oh, we used this to track it when that one character threw it and the other character caught it. We had to track it through the air using this potato. This was the prop. This is the true Infinity Stone. It's like
Yeah.
people are not gonna like want to buy that compared to like a real like resin thing.
Oh man, if they actually made those resin ones and actually sold it, oh my goodness, people would pay so much money for it.
Yeah.
Be nuts. Go to an
Just so
auction, people would probably spend tens of thousands of dollars on an actual
yeah.
prop replica of an Infinity Stone from a movie. Like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
But and that's what I think is another big thing on why I think older movies are better. Is just because they're more about being practical. And of course, yes, CGI wasn't as heavily around way back in the day. It's more of a recent thing. But it seemed like there was a lot more care. There were movies that were made back in the day where it made it look like somebody was hanging off of a huge cliff or like a clock, hanging, dangling high above the city. But it was all about forced perspective, about putting the camera in the right place, putting them in the right place. So it made it seem like they were in danger, but really they were like 5 feet off the ground.
Right
You
now,
know,
that would be totally done in
green
CGI
screen
or
room.
green screen, yeah, crap like that. Do you think that there is a kind of a conspiracy behind making movies mediocre, or do you think that movies being mediocre is just like a result of actually people failing to understand how movies are made? Because I feel like nobody can people really make this many like very mediocre bland movies, especially like big producers like Illumination Studios. Like all of their movies are either mediocre or bad, and they're still a successful studio. Like I don't understand how that's possible.
Well, I
But
think
I feel like it's kind of a conspiracy because like if they make everything kind of mediocre, then they don't have to actually try as hard, right? Like if they make everything good, then there's an expectation for the movies to actually be good. But
yeah.
the more that they just produce, like if they produce low effort like things and say like, "Oh, look at our fancy movie. It's so good." And everybody's like,
Oh, I guess that's what a good movie looks like. They're saying it's a good movie. Everybody's watching it. It must be a good movie. And then that just becomes the standard. And then they don't have, like, companies don't have to try as hard to produce something.
Yeah, well, I mean, I do think that the more they produce mediocre movies, people get used to it, and they just think, oh, well, this must be good, and then they get
He's in
used
on
to
the
it.
conspiracy. He believes in the conspiracy. Yeah, I'm a conspiracy theorist. You never knew that, did you? I honestly think so. Like, I think honestly, a lot of the studios could produce movies that were actually good if they chose to,
Yeah,
but it's just a lot more effort and a lot more money to make a story good
yeah,
than
and
make something that's not good and then just claim that it's good.
yeah, like, like I absolutely hated the first Suicide Squad. I thought it was terrible. I still didn't like some of the characters in the newer one, but I did like the fact that James Gunn did go out of his way to introduce characters that most people thought were jokes or dumb or idiotic, but actually made them cool, and entertaining, instead of just going the lazy route, which is just picking known characters and telling their story again, for the millionth time, and bringing in something new and taking the risk. Because I think with movies, it's all about the risk. You have to be willing to take a risk to try to make something good. But it just seems like nowadays they don't want to take a risk. Like, I believe, as far as I'm concerned, Toy Story officially ended after 4, but now they're apparently making a 5th one, and I'm like, you already made a good official ending. They finally got everything together. They had to tell each other
All right, that's
bye.
another question. All right, how long should a should movies last? How many movies is too many sequels to a movie?
Well, I think once it has a good proper ending, it should stop, and they should move on to something new.
But they can't have like 11 movies of the
Yeah,
same movie, right? Like at that point just have it be a TV show, right? Like
yeah,
you
exactly.
can't have that. So how many movies do you think are so many movies?
um Personally, a lot of my favorites had about 3, and they stopped at that. They're like, okay, we made good 3 movies, we're done. Like Back to the Future. Like, I think a
Hmm.
4th one would have ruined it. I mean, I would personally love to see some more, but I think it would end up ruining it overall, because then you would have too much you got to keep in line and connected. And I mean, they've made the TV show Back to the Future, which I thought was great because it was its own little thing. It was just having fun, being goofy and whatever, and that's fine. But I do believe 3, maybe 4 is enough. Anything after that, and it's just too much. Unless it's based on a book series like Harry Potter, where you kind of got to make more because you're trying to make up with it. But I think 3 is the max. 4, if it's actually good, but around about 3, I would say.
Yeah, I think that that's a good number. Trilogies are probably the best way to go if you're gonna do a lot of movies. But I would also put like a caveat on that and say like, hey, it has to have been planned this way initially. You
Oh
can't
yeah,
just like have one movie that's just like, oh, that was successful. Let's make 2 more. You know, it
yeah,
has to be something that was planned out at least as a potential. Like if this movie does well, we have like more story and we've like already stuck it into the first one, like hidden backstory of another character or something along those lines that plays a minor role earlier on and then becomes a more major role as they continue through the other 2 movies. But if they don't do something like that, to like, I feel like it's one of those um pride things, or like, like, hey, we did this, like, hey, we knew that this was gonna happen, or like we planned this out, um it is a good thing to have so that you know, as a viewer, like, hey, oh, they definitely thought about how this was gonna play out, like in the next two movies.
Yeah, I think
Like
that's
how it all connects.
yeah, I definitely think that's important because yeah, like a lot of modern movies, they just make the one, and then they're just like, well, we'll wait and see if it's successful, then we'll come up with another storyline. It's like,
Hmm.
yeah, but you probably are going to make a lot of mistakes because you're not going to go back to the original movie and go, okay, how can we connect this and make sure it flows right? Because even stuff that's been planned out, sometimes there's small mistakes. Which is understandable because it's hard to remember every single thing. But at least if they're trying to make more stuff ahead of time, just if it does do well, then they can be like, okay, here we got already stories made up. Let's go ahead and pump these out. Because it seems like some movies, like for instance, we'll take Avatar for example. The first one came out like 13 years ago, and now they're making a sequel. It's like, does anybody even remember the first one at this point? Like, shouldn't you have already had all the stuff planned out ahead of time? Because he said, like James Cameron originally said, like he wanted to make five altogether when the first one came out. That was 13 years ago. It's like, okay, well, if you had them all planned, well, why didn't you make one like a year or two after? Why didn't you immediately start working on the next
Yeah,
one?
it should have been immediately. Or like usually, if you have more than one movie, they're either being shot simultaneously, or they're like before the first one is released, they're already filming the second one.
Yeah.
So do you think expectations are too high or too low for movies in the current day?
Um, I would probably go on more of too high. People, you know, put too much expectation into something, and usually by doing that, it can probably make it seem worse sometimes. Because I've seen like with a franchise coming back, and the making, you know, being like, oh, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that, and it makes people's expectations go way too high. And I think that when it does come out, it can make it seem less because they put too much.
I think that that's intentional though. It's
Yeah.
just like how people sell games, right? Like they'll sell games on the promise of, "Hey, this is what their game is gonna be,"
Oh, like
and
No
then
Man's Sky.
everybody, yeah, before the game comes out, right? And then the game comes out, and then everyone's like, "Oh, well, I paid for the game now. I didn't, I didn't pay for the game so that I can play it in 3 years when you actually add all the stuff that you claimed it was going to have initially."
Yeah. Like
You
with
know,
No
that kind
Man's
of
Sky.
that's kind of the thing with movies in the same way, right? Um, where you're selling off of the promise of like, hey, this is a movie that you know. There's a big green guy and a donkey and the red dragon, and you like those characters, so you should watch the next one.
Yeah.
And then everybody's like, "Oh, super hype! Let's go!"
Yeah, and then also with modern movies, they do too much lying, especially in trailers. And there
Right.
was a recent lawsuit, and the people suing the industry actually won, because it's like when people were watching Endgame, they were like they see the trailer, they see the Hulk, they see these certain characters, like, oh my goodness, this is gonna be awesome, and then those characters aren't even in it. you know so I believe that's also like falsely putting the expectations high, make people think, oh, this is going to be great, but you were
And
lied to.
and the best thing is too that they can just sweep it under the rug and say, "Oh yeah, well we had to cut out his that scene. It was initially in the movie as, but yeah, we removed it because it didn't make sense or whatever." Like there's so many things like that, right? Or like where the lines are literally like either dubbed over in the trailer to then what the lines actually are in the film, or the they reshot it with a different line
Yeah.
in the actual movie.
Yeah, which I also believe falls under, now I'm forgetting, not the word deception, but false advertisement. Telling you one thing and then showing a completely different thing.
Yeah, and I feel like that happens a lot, way more commonly with animated stuff, but
Yeah.
can still happen with real life.
Of course, luckily that will never happen again because since the people won their lawsuit, studios can no longer do that in their trailers. If they're going to show you something,
Yeah.
it has to be in it now, which I believe is a good idea because I'm tired. It's like for instance when they showed the trailer for the first Alien movie, like you knew almost nothing about the movie. They were just like, boom, 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 and then you're like, okay, well this seems interesting, but I have no idea what's going to happen. So it's like I'm gonna go watch it and find out. And I think that's a much better way of doing things because if you give too much away in a trailer, I don't think it necessarily ruins the movie. I know for some people it does. For me, somebody could tell me the ending of a movie, still won't ruin it because I want to know what leads up to that. Unless somebody can give me beat for beat of what everything that happens in the movie, then it might. But you know, it just they give too much of the good stuff away, or you know, and then
Use all the best material in the trailer, and then
yeah,
the rest of the movie's
they
not good.
they
Yeah.
don't give you that part of like, oh well, I only saw a couple bits, so it's like I definitely have to know what's going on with this. And I think that will make people enjoy it more because they're not, given too much. You can give like a few, cool, like a couple cool scenes or a couple like crazy scenes, but then make it out of context. I want my trailers to be kind of out of context. So I go, what? I'm confused, but I now have to watch this to figure out what's going on because I'm
Yeah,
confused.
but they have a formulas, I'm sure, that
Yeah.
they know exactly what to put into the trailers to make you want to see them. And like what gets people like excited or whatever. They have test showings and they have, audience, whatever, the participants that'll sit there and literally people like whose job it is to watch those things and give their opinions on it. Like,
Well, no, I mean, I definitely get that, but I do believe that they're very biased on who they get. I mean, like, just to kind of a side thing, it's not quite on movies, but it's still the same example. Like, for instance, like car companies, right? If somebody they get, to review their car and they say anything negative, they will complain to their boss, being like, "Hey, we don't like that this person said some facts about how bad our car is. We want people that are going to agree with us. We want people that are going to be on our side." And I think that falls under same with movies, is that they're always going to find audiences that will want, or fall for what they're saying instead of getting real people. They're going to be like, "Nah, man, this was utter garbage." Because they don't want. I feel like they don't want real, honest opinions. They just want people to be like, "Oh yeah, that was so good. Let me pat you on the back, man. That was great, great,
because
great."
they want
Yeah.
as much money as possible. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think that would also cause movies in modern day to get worse, is they're always trying to appeal to certain people, and they're always going to find those people to review those, and and stuff.
Well,
So
I got one more question on the stuff here.
yeah.
That I feel like is a good way to summarize and sum it up, and that is, where do you see the state of movies in 30 years?
Oh, that's definitely a good question. I feel like in 30 years, like, we won't even have actors anymore. It's just gonna be all done with AI at that point. they're gonna pull dead people from the past, take all their lines, put it in some AI generated thing, and generate whoever they want. I mean, they're kind of doing that now already, bringing dead people back, from the dead and putting them in movies, which I think is terrible. But I do believe movies in the future will definitely not be good at all because it's just going to be just generated on a computer, using, either dead actors or, people that have already done stuff. So, personally. Or we won't even
Yeah,
have movies.
yeah. Right. I was thinking um, that I don't think in 30 years that we'll have like fully AI movies. I do think there'll be bunches and bunches of more crap for people to watch,
Yeah.
just because of the accessibility and ease of making things will become so streamlined. Like we'll have the ability to like use AI to animate characters and things way easier, and like build models and stuff way easier. But I don't necessarily think that it'll an entire AI developed movie. I think that we'll still need to place the characters and have like be able to build the story stuff in like the 3D environment. But I do think that most of the stuff is going to be um, entirely computer generated for movies, like or at least a majority, like a large majority of media is going to be either animated or in some form or another.
Or digitally altering the
Yeah,
actual actors to looking like somebody that's been dead for a long time to bring them back, you know? Because
yeah,
I've
that kind of thing. I feel like that's what's going to happen, and like things like streaming services right already kind of do that, where they have like they just pump out a whole bunch of like cheaply animated stuff from like a bunch of different mini studios that are all like, oh yes, we can animate that film for the lowest possible price that you're going to be willing to pay,
yeah.
like whatever it is. And I feel like that's how a lot of the media is now, and I feel like it's just going to be even more so in the future. But I don't think that people will even think that that's weird. I feel like almost most people will be like, this is normal, like they'll probably think that human actors are like weird, but I still feel like there will be human actors because there's such a or at least collaborations, or like what's the word, cameo, where they'll show up and like, yeah, maybe they'll be like famous from doing something else, like um music or something like that, but then they'll be used in films and stuff, just like how actors are now.
Yeah.
Celebrities are used as
And the other thing is, though, is like, 'cause I
voices and
remember
stuff.
watching the behind the scenes of the prequel series, the Star Wars prequel series, where George Lucas was showing like how he can easily alter how a character walks or how they move, you know, and it was kind of freaking me out a little bit. I was like, wait, so the actor originally did this, but you're able to change it so it made him do something completely different. And I think that might also be an impact in the future as well, as like being able to make somebody do something they originally didn't do when they were being filmed, you know, and I think that can be also kind of a scary thing. But I do believe by doing more of these mediocre things, people, like I said before, they'll just get so used to it, they'll just think this is good, because like I said before, we're influenced by what we watch, what we
Right.
do, and stuff. So, and it's a big impact. So,
And a lot of people don't really care about that kind of thing either. Like a lot of people don't care about deeper movies, or about
yeah,
they don't think about when they're watching a movie like, man, I really wish that character, when that character died, I felt sad. Like that. They don't think like that. They're like, the majority of people, when they theater, they're like, oh, that's cool, or oh, that makes sense, and they don't really think about it too hard, and then they leave the theater and they're like, yeah, that was a good movie. When like uh, the small minority of people that are sitting there like, oh man, that doesn't make any sense. I don't know why he went over here instead of doing that, or like this doesn't make any gosh darn sense. Like everybody in like if you have a really bad made scary movie or horror film or whatever, like everybody's like, no, don't go in that room, or like, oh, you shouldn't have done that, or like, I feel like that's a minority of people when it comes to normal movies, where they're
Yeah.
really judging it and stuff.
I always
So I
love doing
agree.
that.
I agree. I think that a lot of, in the future, I don't think people are really gonna care. Like, think about it as like good or bad, whatever. There's gonna be so much crap out there, and there's just gonna be like whatever you end up watching. Like, I don't think is gonna be any like nuanced, fancy media. There's It's gonna be like a bunch of mediocre stuff that's tailored to whatever that you like. You
Yeah.
know, like kind of like how TikTok is now, right? Like none of that's like objectively good content. It's TikTok.
Yeah, I'd say about 85% is absolute crap. I mean, once in a while I'll find something good, but yeah, it's just all mostly just
But yeah, the algorithm works by just sending you stuff that you watch longer, right? Like the stuff that you like, you're just gonna get an instant feedback of how the algorithm works and trains to
yeah.
like give you what you want to see. And I feel like that's how it's gonna be with like movies and
Well,
shows and all that.
but the algorithm does also like for instance, I saw a dumb video on flat Earth. Completely off topic, but on flat Earth. But I made one comment and just put LOL, and now my feed is just bombarded with that crap, and it's just like I just made a comment. I
Yeah.
even watched the video. Like I mean, I watched like a few seconds, but I just couldn't do it. It's like it was just too dumb,
You know
But
what I don't like? I was on this is also off topic, but it reminded me. There was somebody followed me on Twitter, and then I started getting stuff from what they were looking at on my feed because they followed me. It's like I don't care about them. I don't know who they are, and I'm gonna get stuff that they watch or that they like
yeah.
because like it doesn't make any sense. It's so silly.
And then
But
people like you don't
yeah.
even follow. Sometimes you get their stuff. It's like
Hmm.
a famous actor, does something, and you make one comment on one of their posts, and now all of a sudden you're seeing everything that they like, everything they follow, and it's like, I don't care about all the rest of this stuff. I just made a simple comment. Like, why am I now getting bombarded? And that's actually,
Yeah.
why a lot of people said, there's been a lot of high-end professionals saying the algorithm needs to go. It's just destroying everything, especially like movies and a bunch of other stuff. Because it's like if I make comments on bad movie trailers, you know, um, I'm just gonna see tons more of that instead of like seeing the stuff I actually am interested in because it's the algorithm thinks that, oh, this must be what you like because you made some comments, and it's like, no,
Hmm.
I don't like this. Why are you feeding me this? Or you watch one video on YouTube that you normally never would have watched, but you just enjoyed this one thing, and now you're getting everything else that person makes, even though the rest of it's just bad, So it's like a lot of these algorithms and stuff need to go because it's ruining a lot of things and stuff. So, but
All right. Yeah, I think that pretty much summarizes what our opinions are on
yeah,
old movies and new movies or modern movies.
yeah, definitely. So I guess we'll go ahead and end it here, and I'll let everybody know. Thank you for listening. If you were listening to this afterwards, we definitely appreciate it, and we will be doing more stuff, more frequent, hopefully. We'll also have more longer discussions, but I think we'll also be doing some more, going through articles and stuff and giving our own little opinions on those as well. So, thank you again, everybody, for listening. This is DJ Batman, and
Oh, am I supposed to bonus?
so, stay tuned for more stuff. And other than that, thank you all for listening. And all I have to say is DJ Batman out. Did you want to say anything before we
No,
go?
I'm
No?
good.
All right. Well, then, later, everybody. Peace.